don't let it hold you back. I think if you've not got any other employment, go self-employed, then book the consultation with the accountant and just do it really simply to start with. You can always change.
Hello and welcome back to the Healthy Practice from Write Up. I'm your host Lisa O'Rourke and I'm the content producer here at Write Up. In today's episode, we are taking a look at the business of therapy, from what it really takes to create a thriving private practice to the operational tools and mindset shifts that can help you protect your financial health. To join us in this discussion, I'm delighted to welcome Dr Rosie Gilderthorp. Rosie is a clinical psychologist and the founder of Know Your Mind Consulting. She is a writer, podcast host and the creator of Psychology Business School, where she offers coaching, courses and resources to help clinicians step away from burnout and build values-driven businesses. Okay, well, hello Rosie, welcome back to the Healthy Practice podcast, and I'm really excited for our conversation today. For many clinicians, moving from the NHS or a charity or an agency into private practice can be very daunting. I think that's actually the case probably for many industries. What would you say are the non-negotiable steps for someone who is want to launch a private practice? What is the non-negotiable steps for their first 30 days?
So this is a really interesting question, and thank you for having me on to talk about this, because often the thing that I think we miss when we're thinking about setting up a private practice is our reason for doing that. And when coaching clients land with me in my startup program, they've arrived for lots of different reasons. And I've talked publicly, probably the last time I was on this podcast, about my journey into private practice. And people, often come into private practice because of some kind of difficulty in life. And so the first thing actually that I'd suggest is understand why you're doing your private practice and make sure that the business you're building is going to support what it is you need from your practice. And that's the step that everybody misses. So for example, when I came into private practice, it was because my children's additional needs meant I couldn't work in an employed role anymore. So that tells you immediately that this practice has to replace my income, because this wasn't a planned move. Many people come into private practice planning it for many years, saving up. Maybe the financial side isn't so important to them at that stage of their career. That was not the case for me. I was 29. It was chaos. I needed to pay the rent. So that was, replacing the income, but having flexible hours that worked with the kind of patchy childcare that I was able to secure. So those were the two priorities. So the first thing for everybody is understand what those priorities are for you and don't let them go. Build your practice and your boundaries around them from the beginning. Everybody forgets that. Obviously, there are some legal requirements that are the same for everybody. So you need to have your key contracts and policies in place. And I know we're going to talk a bit more about that today. You need a GDPR compliant data management system. So you have to know what you're going to do with information when it comes into your inbox. So say you put out the feelers and a client inquires with you, plan from end to end what you're going to do with their information, what happens to that email message, and make sure that you've got a safe and GDPR compliant plan for all of that client data. Because once it starts coming in, you do not want to be scrabbling around panicking, like, oh my goodness, where do I store this? Or like, is it okay to write their name in my notebook? All of those questions will come bubbling up and give you a panic attack. And that's not a great way to start a therapeutic relationship. So get all of that sorted beforehand. And I know that we're going to talk more about tools a bit later on, but I actually really advocate investing in a practice management software from the beginning. Obviously, we're on the Write Up podcast, so
I know,
that's the one that I use. But some sort of practice management system which has been designed with GDPR and health data in mind, I actually think is really essential, even if you're just seeing a couple of clients and you're right at the beginning of your practice. It isn't a very big cost. Really, when you consider that you're setting up a new business and there are always costs involved in that. And it can save you so much time and so much anxiety in the early days that I would definitely do that early on. And then the final thing, which again, many people forget to do, is think about the client group. So when you've been in an employed role for a long time, those clients land at your door, potentially not even wanting to be there. Very often as an NHS psychologist, you'll be seeing somebody that actually wanted to see psychiatry, for example. And you do the job of selling to them, motivational interviewing, convincing them that you can be helpful as a therapist when they come to their appointment with you. That is not the way that it works in independent practice. In independent practice, somebody has to choose you because they believe that you can get them somewhere that they want to go. So, right from the beginning, you've got to have an idea of who those people are that you want to help and what it is that they want from you.
Yeah. No, that is amazing advice, and it really does make sense. To me, it sounds like if you're stepping into private practice, you want to build a practice that works for you, and you don't end up just chasing your tail and just keep building, then you end up at a point where you do burnout because you've actually built a business that's maybe thriving, but it doesn't actually like meet your needs, and it's quite hard to then strip that back once you reach like a certain stage. I would imagine. So that sounds like amazing advice. Thank you. We always hear the advice to find your niche, and that is in like therapy, but also across many industries as well. Like especially now that social media is huge, and there is so many people taking to social media to like promote their business, and it comes up all the time. Find your niche, find your niche, but we have found like in our research that many therapists worry that maybe narrowing what they offer or what they're focusing on can maybe end up like they would feel like it can turn like clients away, or they could maybe lose out money. So how would you pitch the business value of specializing to someone who's maybe a bit unsure or on the fence about that?
Gosh, so many ways. I'm actually really passionate about this subject, and specifically for mental health professionals, because I think the way that it's talked about in the general online business community can be a little bit misleading, and I understand why it gives people some anxiety. I think it's much more helpful, rather than thinking about niche, to think about specialism. Think about yourself as a professional who is still developing. Like, private practice is not where your professional fulfillment goes to die.
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
think it used to have a bit of that reputation that actually this was just like the path towards retirement, because that's what it was for most people. It certainly, even when I started out, which is you know, less than 10 years ago, it was still seen as really, okay, this is what you do when maybe you're a bit too tired to keep going in the NHS, but you still need a bit of money before you hit pension age. That is not the case for many of us. And I think the strongest reason that I would tell people to think about specializing is so that you get to continue developing as a professional in a way that gives you a sense of achievement and accomplishment, where you can set yourself meaningful milestones and see your kind of expertise and authority in your field develop. Because what I've noticed, I've been supporting other psychologists and therapists now for over 6 years. So I've worked with hundreds. And what I've noticed is that if you don't do that, if you do stay general, you feel like you're a trainee again for the rest of your career. And you never get that sense of, accomplishment, of feeling like your career has moved forward in some way. So I think it's really important from that kind of professional fulfillment perspective. But it doesn't need to be as narrow as I only work with one type of person. I always think of your specialism as the thing that if I said you have to do a PhD tomorrow, and I'm not going to let you leave this library until you've started researching for your literature review, what subject would you pick that you wouldn't find like super boring or painful to do a PhD on? And that would be pretty broad usually. It if say your specialism is something like I don't know, autism and ADHD, think of all of the groups of people that you could help with that specialism. it's not like, oh, I'm only going to work with, and this is, I'm making fun a little bit of what I see in some generic business courses, but it's not like, oh, I'm only going to work with women aged 34 who drive Peugeots. Like, that would be really boring. We don't want to see the same client over and over again. But knowing that I'm amazing at working with neurodivergent women who were diagnosed late, well, you could be helping them with birth trauma, you could be helping them with the perimenopause, you could be helping them thrive in the workplace. Whether you're specializing to a particular struggle that people have or to something that a client group has in common, like maybe being late diagnosed, there's usually loads of scope for exploration within that. So it's not as limiting as people think. The other weird thing about it, and I do think this is weird, I can't necessarily explain why this happens, but you don't tend to find that you get a reduction in generic referrals. So this is the anxiety that most people that I work with have at the beginning. Will I lose all my generic Bupa clients or my generic AXA clients? And the answer is just no. Like, even if your website and your profiles are all really specialized, people seem to prefer a specialist to a generalist, even if it's in a different area, which is interesting. And that sort of brings me to the biggest reason that you really should specialize in your private practice. And that's, exactly what I was talking about before. We have to meet people where they're at, and we have to give them something they know they want. And if you think about your own behavior, if you've ever had to access private healthcare or private mental health care, I guarantee you will have looked for somebody who seems passionate and invested in supporting people with the exact problem that you have. You want to know that they've published papers in this area. You want to know that they've been obsessed with people exactly like you for ages. You want to know that their CPD is going to be top notch. And you can only realistically provide that kind of, gold star service if you're specialized and focusing your attention in one particular area. It's just not feasible to do it otherwise. So I suppose those are the big reasons. It partly is about marketing, but it's also about that sense of really developing an excellent service that is really fulfilling for you to provide as well.
Yeah. No, that is a very interesting take. And when you were chatting through that there, it did make me think like, yeah, if I seen someone, if I was looking for a therapist, if I seen that they specialised or their main focus was like one certain group of people or some type of issue, like it actually wouldn't put me off working with them. Because I would know that they would have done the same training and they would have had still a general like knowledge on a wider scope, but they've just decided to focus in on the one. So yeah, that is a very interesting intake on it for sure. Okay, so when it comes to the technical structure of a practice, there are various options that you can set a business up by choosing a limited company, sole trader, or a community interest company, etc. Sure, the list goes on. How did you figure out what is best for you, and do you see any solo practitioners make any legal mistakes?
Yeah, so this is actually a very tricky question.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I have to start by saying you should pretty much always take advice from an accountant.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can find an accountant that has expertise in business formation, that is particularly useful. So my accountant, he has always advised me on what is the best legal formation um, for my company, and it's changed at different times over the course of my practice. So as most people do, started out as a sole trader. Advantage of that is it is incredibly quick. The one thing we do very well here in the UK is make it very easy to become self-employed. So you literally just tell HMRC and you're off.
Yeah.
And again, tax is pretty simple. You have to keep digital records now, which I think is a really positive thing because it's empowering you to understand your numbers and keep a good track rather than scaring yourself at the end of the year. So stuff like, the self-assessment tax return, yes, you have to do that as a sole trader, but no, it is not complicated. And so particularly if money's tight at the beginning of your practice and you don't want anything complicated, sole trader's very quick and easy, and you don't necessarily have to pay for any support with your tax return if you're willing to learn how to do it, which I think you should be, because it's good to understand. Um, but there are, tax and legal reasons that you might consider changing formation, or even starting with a different formation depending on your circumstances. So for people who are employed as well, usually I've heard Mahmood recommend that limited companies are a good way to go because of the way that our tax system is structured here in the UK. And there are also other reasons that you might decide that you want to be a limited company. It's there in the name. There is limited liability, means that if the business gets into debt, then the business could go bankrupt rather than you as an
Right. Okay.
individual,
Yeah.
which can be something that people worry about and can be quite useful. It does not limit your clinical liability, though. I think people often think it does. It doesn't. As a health professional, you are liable for any harm that comes to your clients, and it is your professional indemnity insurance that you need in place for that. Being a limited company doesn't have any effect on that, but it does limit your financial liability. So again, if you're going into business with other people, or you're doing something in your business that has some financial risk to it, that could be quite useful. That isn't usually the case for most people starting in private practice, which is why you really do need to take this to an accountant that can look at your financial circumstances, can look at your business plan, and give you a steer on whether going limited is worth the extra kind of costs associated with the complicated tax system. Because I'm afraid the tax system for limited companies is complicated. And I do think we should all empower ourselves to understand it to the best that we can. But I do not believe that many of us are going to manage our own accounts as limited companies. I certainly don't, and I've got an MBA where I did finance and accounting. um, I understand it, and I think we all should, but I can't do it, and I don't want to do it. So I guess that's the downside of a limited company, is that you will need to invest in that support from early on. Other formations, you mentioned the community interest company. That's a social enterprise structure. And this is where you would have an asset lock in the business. That means that the business cannot make profit. It can pay you a salary, but it can't pay you dividends like you might do in a limited company. So it's not tax efficient in the way that a limited company would be. But it does mean that because the assets are locked, you can only invest profit that the company makes either in the operations of the company, or you can give them to another asset locked entity that is doing work with the client group that you said your community interest company was set out to help. So this could be a really good one if you want to access grant funding. So if your dream with a project that you're working on is to offer it at, a very low cost to a service user group that wouldn't be able to pay you privately, that could be a great company formation for you, because it means that you can, after a few years of good governance, apply for the kinds of pots of money that they're only going to entrust to a not-for-profit organisation. And of course, you've got charity structures as well, which are different again. I would say take significant advice from accountants and lawyers when you're deciding on a company formation like that, because often there are upsides and there are downsides to everyone. And it could be that for some parts of your business, it makes sense to have one formation, and for other parts, it makes sense to have another. So there isn't a one-size-fits-all answer,
Yeah.
but those are the kinds of things you need to be thinking about.
Yeah, for sure. It is. It's so daunting, for people going into private practice, going self-employed, because unless you actively go out, research this type of stuff, speak to an accountant, you generally just, you don't know. No one is going to tell you this information. And I think even when you read online, some of the information can be very conflicting as well. So yeah, I think speaking to an accountant definitely sounds
Yeah,
like
just don't
a
let
bit
it hold
first
you back.
protocol. Yeah.
Don't let it hold you back. I think if you've not got any other employment, go self-employed, then book the
Hmm.
consultation with the accountant, and just do it really simply to start with. You can always change.
Yeah.
Um, if you are employed, see the accountant first, because it's probably going to be a limited company. Um, but yeah, just I think often at the beginning, and I think I made a note to talk about this at some point, so I might repeat myself later. Um, but often at the beginning of a practice, we're quite frightened of investing in anything. Everything feels like a cost. But actually, you've got to take your business seriously. If you invest in getting advice from an accountant, in maybe getting a little bit of software to help you, you're so much more likely to do the stuff that makes you successful in your business because you've got some skin in the game. If you refuse to pay, £100 to see an accountant, 50 quid for some software, what are you really telling yourself about how much you believe in your ability to make this business work? And often it is numbers that low. If somebody wants to go self-employed as a hairdresser, they'll have to put in thousands at the beginning. They'll have to really believe in themselves. They might even have to go to a bank to get a loan and convince the bank to believe in them before they can do it. We're very lucky that we can get started with quite low overheads. But I think what it leads people to is this belief that, they're not really worth investing in. And they don't have to challenge that early on like you would do if you were going to a bank and saying, invest in me. Um, and so I think that has a real downside to it. And I think if you're sitting there thinking, oh, I really don't want to spend 100 quid on seeing the accountant, well, why should anybody spend 100 quid coming to see you then?
Mm-hmm. No, that makes total sense. You actually need to convince yourself, like, well, why would you invest in yourself instead of telling everyone else? Tell it to yourself and make that investment.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. Um, no, I really like that thought process. What are your three essential practice policies a therapy business owner needs to have in place before practicing?
So there are actually quite a lot. I don't know if I've mentioned this before, but I got together with a lawyer, Claire Veal from Aubergine Legal,
Mm-hmm.
and Anna Bunch from Psych VA, and we put together a pack of all of the essential policies and contracts you've got to have in place to practice safely in the
Mm-hmm.
UK, and it's pretty extensive. But picking the top three that I was thinking, right, okay, if like what could you really not practice safely without? The top three I came up with was terms and conditions for your clients. They have to know what's expected of them and what they can expect from you. And your terms and conditions document sets out everything really about how you're going to handle payments, what you're going to do if they turn up late or if they need to cancel an appointment. All of those kind of things that can really get in the way of a therapeutic relationship going smoothly, like payment and diary stuff. That's all managed in that document. But within that as well, they're also acknowledging that they understand and accept your privacy policy, like how you're going to manage their data. And I know I talked at the beginning about how important it is to know exactly how you're going to manage your data. So the terms and conditions is also a place where you double check that they understand all of that and that they're happy with it. You also get to set out what happens if there are, disputes or anybody wants to complain, all of that stuff that you hope you're never going to have to use, but you might well. So that document's really essential. And it kind of can't operate without the second document, which is the privacy policy. And this is the one where you go into a lot of detail about what information you're going to collect from people and what you're going to do with that information. This is obviously a legal requirement. It's essential for GDPR purposes. But I also think it's really helpful for you as a clinician because while you're going through your policy, and I'd really encourage you to use one of our templates or a template that you get from a lawyer, because you can't really write these things yourself and get them right. But when you're going through that and adapting it for the software that you're using and the people that you have to share information with, that is going to force you to think about your GDPR compliant process. And the way that I do it actually is I write the policy and then I build the process that matches the policy because it's just the way that my brain works. I know going through this policy, I'm creating the gold standard and then I just have to make that true in real life. So it can actually be quite a useful document to work through, even if it is a bit daunting at the beginning. And then the final thing that you need to be GDPR compliant is client consents. So this will vary depending on the type of work that you're offering. That you need to get your clients to explicitly consent to your terms and conditions, your data protection policy, and to anything else that you might be doing in your work that requires specific consent under GDPR. So that might be things like recording sessions. I always get explicit consent if I'm using AI tools like a note taker, for example. Um, so yeah, there are lots of reasons that a consent form might be useful for you. Some people integrate it with their terms and conditions. Other people will do that separately. But it's really important to make sure you're getting explicit consent for all the
Yeah.
things we need to under GDPR.
Yeah, I was actually going to, when you mentioned that, I was going to ask if you had started using like kind of AI and like maybe like a scribe tool, because I think that has been a topic of discussion where you actually now need to kind of like get permission with everyone to make sure that you can they're happy with it. But no, that sounds like such great advice, and that's, I think the three that you mentioned there are probably something that you should maybe think about in the first 30 days or like the
Mm.
first few months of setting up as well. So yeah, very key examples there that you've gave. We know that when running your own business, it can feel like there are never enough hours in the day. That's why at WriteUp we have created an all-in-one solution that saves you time and lets you focus on what matters most, helping your clients. At WriteUp, you can effortlessly schedule sessions, keep secure detailed records, and streamline your admin all in one place. Whether you're in private practice or part of a larger team, WriteUp is a smart, secure, and simple solution that you need. Join over 50,000 clinicians who are taking ownership of their practice with WriteUp. Go to writeup.com. That's WRITEUPP.com. So on to our next question, which I actually think a lot of people are going to benefit from hearing your advice with this, because I think it comes up a lot with anyone who starts to go self-employed. So setting fees often brings a massive wave of imposter syndrome and maybe guilt, and honestly a little bit of embarrassment, I think, as well. How can clinicians calculate their hourly rates in a way that doesn't just cover the basic expenses, but gives them a space to thrive and also to avoid like burnout?
I love this question. And I've talked about it on my podcast, The Business of Psychology, loads of times with my good friend and business bestie, really, Sally Farrant, um, otherwise known as the pricing queen. And so, Sally's method, which has really helped me, I met her early on in my practice and she kind of shook me by the shoulders and was like, you need to work out your fees using this formula. And it has helped me so much over the years. It's basically, you need to be honest with yourself to start with about what you want to take home for the year.
Yeah.
So a lot of people, you wouldn't believe how many of my startup coaching clients do not know this. They're like, oh, maybe, I don't know, it would be nice to just, no, I need you. And if you've got other adults in your family, to sit down with a spreadsheet and work out what do you need and what do you want for the year.
Yeah.
Then we take that kind of what do you want to take home fee for the whole year, and we add what do we think your costs are going to be for the whole year. So add those two things together. So you've worked out what you want your take home pay to be and what your costs are. Add those two things together. Then we're going to divide that by the number of therapy hours that you want to do across the whole year.
Mm-hmm.
So notice that we're not working weekly or monthly here. We're doing annually. And that's
Yep.
because the biggest mistakes people make when they're setting their fees is thinking that they're going to work the same number of hours week in, week out through the year. You're
Mm-hmm.
not. You're going to take holiday. You're going to be sick. There are going to be months of the year where your client group is a lot quieter. And that's not the same for all of us. But say if you're working with children and young people, I hear from my coaching clients that the summer holidays are dead. Nobody will
Mm-hmm.
see you in the summer holidays. And so if you know that, you need to work that into your calculations of how many sessions you're actually going to offer across the year. And the other thing that people tend to do at this stage is underestimate their costs. Or they do what we were talking about a minute ago, and they think they're going to run their practice on a shoestring. And that just sets you up for a horrible experience, and it doesn't make a good client experience either.
Mhm.
So at this point, when you're working out your costs, factor in support from a virtual assistant. I couldn't stress how valuable that is. Even with all the AI tools and all the productivity software that we have, that personal touch for your clients to be able to get in touch with a real human and say, "Oh goodness, I'm not going to make it this week," or for you to do the same thing if you if you're having a bit of stress in your life. It is so valuable, and my clients have always rated my virtual assistant very highly. Um, and yeah, I could talk all day about customer experience, but so factor in getting VA support, factor in good software like, Write Up, for example, other tools I might mention later, but make sure that you factored in the software that is actually useful to you. Don't go with the cheapest option, go with the one that makes you do your best work or allows you to do your best work. Obviously, you need to factor in stuff like rent. Do you need to invest in some premium Wi-Fi? Is your home connection actually good enough for a serious business, or do you need to invest in the next tier up? Factor all of that in. Factor in your insurance and your professional bodies fees, and make sure that you've got a healthy CPD budget. So those are just some things, but basically, be generous with yourself, and factor in what you think those costs could be for the whole year. So when you do that, you're basically taking that big number of what you want to take home plus all the costs, dividing it by this very reasonable number of client hours that you actually want to do. And that will give you the minimum fee that you can charge and still take home the money that you want to take home. So you just don't deviate from that. It's not emotional.
Yeah, it's that no, that is an amazing thought process and calculation to work out, because I don't actually think a lot of people even think like that, maybe, or think how much do you actually want to take home. And maybe that's because if you have been in employment all your full life, it's kind of out of your hands to decide that. So it's maybe a thought process that most people don't have. So I think that's a really, really beneficial calculation and way to think about it. So I hope everyone who's listening writes that down if you're thinking about starting your private practice, because that from the get-go will just, if you've got that calculation, it's more like, well, that is exactly what I need to charge, and you don't need to think one or two other ways about it.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
do, if this is a sticking point for you, then do come over and listen to the Business of Psychology podcast with Sally
Hmm.
Farrant, because she walks us through it in a lot more detail.
Yeah.
And I think we've also got a link there to a calculator that she's created to make it even easier. So we don't even
Amazing.
have to do maths.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, perfect. Perfect. Because who
exactly.
wants to do maths unless you actually are an accountant or someone who likes doing numbers? Because I know I certainly don't either. Okay, great. So moving on. So something that's affecting a lot of people right now is the kind of cost of living, and it is affecting how people spend their money. I don't know if not as many people feel like they've got as much income to spend on luxuries or to spend on things that make them feel good, like therapy or counselling. So we know some months can be quieter than usual. How would a practice owner financially plan for natural ebb and flows of the business throughout the year?
So I think if you've calculated your fee in that way we
Hmm.
talked about, that really does protect you, because you've sort of baked into that the assumption that there will be some slow months, because there will be for all practices. One thing I would say is don't make too many assumptions about what your client group are likely to be able to afford or not afford, given the cost of living crisis. Because although that's a very real thing, actually, private practice, private therapy is very expensive. It's, right up there in the luxury part of the market, because, you're not really, say most psychologists would be, £120 an hour or even more than that. Well, your service doesn't cost £120. It costs 120 times 12 at a minimum, usually. That's a lot of money. And so, unfortunately, and I think we all wish this wasn't the case, the people that are hit hardest by the cost of living crisis are the people at the bottom, not at the top. And so, your private clients are very likely in an income bracket that is quite protected from the cost of living crisis. So I think whenever we have kind of economic shocks, people tend to overgeneralize and make a lot of assumptions about what's going on for their clients. And unfortunately, it just doesn't work like that. Society is not affected equally by these things, and it's not always clear how it's going to affect your client group. So try not to panic too much about it. But I do think it's good to build resilience into your practice. And we do that by building up multiple referral streams. Now, if you've taken the advice from the beginning and you've got a strong specialism, that's a lot easier to do because the word of mouth will start to really help you. But you can also build up a strong professional network who can refer into you because they know that you're an expert in a particular area. You're also much more able to stand out online and build that digital footprint, which is going to bring people to you via search. All of that is pretty much impossible if you're very generic in your services. So multiple referral sources is very important. That strong specialism, but also when you get a bit more established in your practice and you're earning enough that you can start to put a little bit aside to invest in new projects in the business, that's when I would consider bringing in additional income streams, ideally with a completely different market. So that if something does happen that means that your client group completely dries up in the private market, I don't think that'd be the cost of living crisis, but it might be that everyone takes out health insurance and the big insurance companies decide that they want all of their therapists to be in-house. That could
Mhm.
happen. Not saying
Yeah.
I have no information that is going to
Mm.
happen, by the way. I don't want to scare
Just
anybody.
yeah.
But this is the kind of thing that if you're thinking, when I was doing my master's in business, this is the kind of thinking that the big corporations do. They
Yeah.
scan the environment and they think, what could happen? What are the scenarios we need to plan for? And that is
Mhm.
one of them realistically. So I'd encourage anybody, once you've got your practice up and running, to start thinking, what could I add in here that will give me an income stream, even if my main income stream dies off? So, there are loads of different things that you could consider. Um, a lot of people are interested in things like online products, digital products. That can be fantastic, but only really if you're the kind of person that wants to build an audience for that kind of thing. Not everybody does. People tend to overlook things like professional training. Like if you've been investing in this specialism, then you've probably got something that your colleagues want to hear about. So again, the specialism is the core of everything. But think about that. Is there training that I could offer to other health professionals? Is there training I could offer to organisations that would be a different market, if you like, to your private practice work? So, I think a lot of my clients, because I have a program called Evolve and Thrive for people at this stage looking for those additional income streams. They also do really well offering things like group programs for people that might be sitting on their waiting list. Because if you've got a strong specialism, it's very likely that those people on the waiting list have got a lot in common. And for some client groups, we can give them something extra that therapy doesn't if we can sort of give them a group experience. Doesn't work for every client group, but can be a really good one for the right client group. But again, that's within the same market. So it's not the first place I'd go for that financial resilience that we were talking about.
Yeah. Well, that kind of answers one of our questions about how if you want to like scale your business, but you maybe don't want to take on, maybe you're at capacity with how many sessions you can do, but you do want to have a look at different avenues. As you say, digital products is like quite a massive thing I see quite a lot now, and that kind of group setting as well. So yeah, it's just really having a look and see, right, but if you're at capacity, or if maybe you're having a few quieter months, like what are these other avenues? Because there is loads. There's so much you can do, especially with like online now as well.
But that's why it's so important to know what you want your business to do for you.
Yeah.
That thing, that values piece that we so often rush through because maybe we're coming into private practice at quite a stressful time of life.
Hmm.
If you're not clear on that, it's really easy to pick the wrong one. Like, I've done it before. I took on associates. I had a really busy clinic, a waiting list. I was like, oh my goodness. So I took on associates. Actually, I don't like managing people. And the thing I wanted from my business was flexibility. You don't really have flexibility when you're somebody's boss. I,
Yeah,
I found that
true.
really difficult. It just didn't
Yeah.
match with the lifestyle that I wanted and needed in my business. Whereas things like, getting into coaching and group programs and offering digital products, that matches really well for me. I don't mind being on camera. I don't mind building an audience. All of that stuff is fun for me when I've got something interesting to talk about. And so that aligned really nicely with the way that I wanted to live my life. But you have to kind of get honest with yourself, because there are so many things you could do. Like, I couldn't even list them all. It's just really important. Don't default to the one that you see on Instagram, because that might not be the right fit for you. Spend time exploring it. And that's what I love doing with people in coaching, because when you find the right fit, it's not that difficult. It shouldn't feel like pushing a boulder up a hill.
Yeah. No, I completely agree with that. So really specializing and find your niche, and also just thinking like what you want to get out of becoming a private practice is really
Mm.
important. Before I let you go, Rosie, if a therapist is listening to this right now feeling completely overwhelmed by the business side of their practice, what is the single most impactful action that they can take this week to move the needle forward?
So I think the most impactful action that you can take if you're feeling overwhelmed by any of it is to start by setting your boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
So make sure that you've got a clear, defined clinic times in your diary so that you're not working outside of those hours. Make sure that you've got clear and enforceable policies so you know exactly what happens in all those scenarios that you don't want to deal with, like DNAs or people not paying, that kind of thing. Get support early. I would have a VA from day one of my practice, because you can bet your bottom dollar that there isn't a private psychiatrist that sets up their private practice without a secretary. Treat yourself in the way that you deserve. Show yourself that you're valuable from day one, because that puts a boundary in place immediately. And that's the one that I see most of my clients starting out struggling with and becoming overwhelmed by very quickly, because clients will contact you when you're in Sainsbury's. Like, if your practice phone is your mobile phone, you are going to get a call from somebody very distressed when you've got a toddler and you're doing the big shop in Sainsbury's, and it's going to be devastating. So don't allow that to happen. From early on, make sure that you've got a VA dealing with all incoming inquiries, and you've got your boundaries set up so that you feel safe in your work and you feel like a valuable professional, because you are, and your business should make you feel that way from early on.
Amazing. That's amazing advice. Thank you so much, Rosie. Everything that you said, I think, was spot on and just really beneficial to anyone who's maybe been sitting on the fence, just waiting to take that jump into private practice. So thank you so much for your insight. But I can let you go now because I know you need to jump off. But thank you so much for that chat. I hope you enjoyed it.
I did. Thank you so much for having me.
And that's the end of today's episode. I just want to say a big thank you to Rosie for sharing her fantastic insights into this topic. I hope you took something away from it. Remember to check out writeup.com for all your practice's software solutions and start your free 30-day trial. No payment details required. Thanks for listening to the Healthy Practice podcast. If you enjoyed it, please leave us a rating and review. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.